Hey, what's up everyone? I hope you're all having a great day. Today I wanted to follow up on a previous video that I made regarding the state of the tank role. The video generated a lot of discussion, and needless to say, there was a lot of discussion about 6v6. I did try my best to be clear that none of my points were about game design specifically or what I thought about it, but rather they were descriptional and observational points pertaining to what the game design, whatever it may be, has led to in terms of how players feel in general about tank. Keywords being feels in general. I understand that tanks shouldn't be overpowered and that game design necessitates that tanks have limitations, but game design doesn't stop me from discussing what is at least a little annoying. When I'm trying to chase down a Mercy and she proceeds to fly away from me, I understand that that's how the game works, but it doesn't stop me from saying that that's really annoying when it happens. I agree that having ways to disengage a tank is fine. I'm not saying that I should be able to fly on Zarya, but I think it's fair to say that there is a point where the natural limitations of tank can get excessive. I did get some comments saying that they love the current state of tank and that they have a lot of fun playing it. I'm not saying that they're wrong at all, that is a perfectly valid opinion to have. But undoubtedly, the general opinion of the Overwatch enthusiast community, that is the opinion of people who spend much of their free time playing and watching Overwatch, agree that tank falls short of a great experience. I also had some comments telling me that the video was a skill issue. I'm not sure how to respond to that, because none of the points that I made had anything to do with the difficulty of tank being a problem. I will agree that tank is extremely fun to play when you completely outskill the enemy team, i.e. when you're smurfing, but if a key component of the game is only fun while smurfing, perhaps it deserves a reconsideration. Not to mention that people of all skill levels from Bronze 5 to Rank 5 who are all actually playing at their skill level have said that there's something wrong about the tank experience, especially at the higher ranks. Now, maybe everybody is just stupid, but regardless if 20% of the game is considered unfun to play, it would be weird if a game designer, that is Blizzard, somehow saw that as a non-issue, and perhaps it deserves a second look. Perhaps the strongest claim about game design that I made in that video was my claim that tank is the least influential part of the team. And some commenters were right to challenge my claim about this because I wasn't particularly clear about what I meant. They rightfully pointed out that my claim was in some ways ridiculous because tank diffs by far are the strongest diffs in the game. You know very clearly when your tank is bad, and when they're bad, the game is almost always lost. How could someone possibly say that tank is the least influential? I am not going to make a counter-argument because, to be honest, the objection is not incorrect, but instead I'm going to be making a clarification about what tanks actually influence, or rather what they impact in terms of the outcome of the game, and why tanks can be both the most impactful and the least impactful part of the team at the same time. In general, it's very easy to help your teams lose the game. The easiest way to do that is of course just to AFK. If you don't help your team win, they will almost certainly lose. In comparison, it's significantly more difficult to help your team win the game because the opposing team has a goal that directly conflicts with your goal of winning. Relating this to the impact that tank makes on the outcome of a game, tank has a very large impact in how significantly you might lose. A large tank diff, even if the tank is trying their best, might be worse than having an AFK DPS. Unfortunately for the tank, beyond simply not losing, the tank, compared to other roles, has very little impact on carrying the team to victory. The inability to be proactive in your playmaking is what I largely meant by least influential part of the team, and this is most likely to be said by tank mains. Non-tank mains may feel differently because they always notice when their tank is throwing, but rarely notice when their tank is carrying, and so non-tank players are likely to say that tanks are the most influential part of the team. Neither person is necessarily wrong, but they have different perspectives that cause them to notice and therefore say different things. To illustrate this point, try to figuratively close your eyes, and try your best to count the times where you really felt that your Reinhardt just played so amazingly well that you would credit them with carrying your game. Now try to do the reverse. Try your best to count the times where you really felt that your Reinhardt just played so terribly that they just completely threw your game. How often do you hear the words tank carry versus tank sucks? Unfortunately, the ratio of these two things in my mind is probably about 0 to I don't even know because there's too many. Now I am picking on what is unfortunately perhaps the least impactful tank in order to make my point, but the point extends to other tanks as well. When was the last time you really felt that your Orisa carried the game, or Roadhog, or Junker Queen, or Ramattra? The only time you really feel the tank's presence is when they ult, because they have some of the strongest ults in the game. Well played Ramattra, good job pressing Q. The perceived and realized difference in potential to carry versus throw is a significant reason why tank players are saying that the role kind of sucks. There's a lot of mistakes that you can make, but not a lot of mistakes that you can punish yourself. Now, I will make a very quick comment about 6v6 since I know people will be thinking about it, but the video is not about 5v5 versus 6v6, and I'll remind you that I have not played Overwatch 1. Compared to Overwatch 1, the tank has essentially absorbed the responsibilities of another player on the team, but has not absorbed the actual abilities that allow you to make impactful decisions. Tank as a whole has not lost any responsibilities, it's just two players' responsibilities have become one, and therefore a tank player's mistakes are now twice as bad as they used to be. Unfortunately, the now singular tank has not gained any meaningful abilities, other than a little bit of extra health and an anti-knockback passive. The singular tank doesn't do double the damage, a lot of the damage went to the supports. The singular tank doesn't have double the survivability, a lot of it also went to the supports. And the tank doesn't have double the utility, half of it got removed completely. I won't go as far as to say that the return of 6v6 is the solution, because to be honest, I don't know. It's possible that 5v5 just needs a rework, but I will say that the transition as of now has not been very nice to the tanks. The two tanks that in my humble opinion were least affected and therefore the best picks if you want to proactively make an impact are D.Va and Zarya. Both D.Va and Zarya innately have very high damage potential on their own, and therefore it might not feel as bad to lose the damage of another tank. Zarya did in fact get a second bubble along with a health increase, which makes her much more survivable going into Overwatch 2. And D.Va against most comps already has an infinite damage mitigation with Defense Matrix, and so doesn't feel the lack of survivability as much since the mitigation is already infinite. Not to mention that even if you counter Defense Matrix, she literally has 2 lives, especially with ult, coupled with a very high mobility, giving her a bigger presence on the map. Ironically, among all the talk about DPS countering the tank, the one person on the enemy team that can effectively nullify the impactfulness of a hero like Zarya is the enemy tank's pick. Oftentimes, if you pick Zarya and win the first fight, you will immediately be greeted with the sound and sight of a Reinhardt charging courageously towards you. And you know from that point on that unless the enemies just make the most outrageous errors, the next 10 minutes will be occupied by you pointing your laser pointer at the Great Orange Wall of Overwatch. You lose all of your ability to make an impact because the enemy tank picked Reinhardt, and the enemy tank loses all of their impact because they picked Reinhardt. Now, the enemy tank is not wrong for wanting to counterpick, but the overall point is that the interaction between the two tanks almost always results in doing things that involve making the already not impactful tank even less impactful. You don't outplay the enemy tank by making some kind of intelligent decision, because you don't have enough of a reach to even interact with the rest of the enemies anyway. You outplay the enemy tank by picking a different tank, because that's the only play that you can really make. There are some exceptions to the non-interactive nature of tanks, like Wrecking Ball and Doomfist, who actually do interact a lot with the enemy backline. But I probably don't need to explain why, despite arguably being the most fun and interactive tanks, they aren't really in a great spot in general. Unless of course you're smurfing, in which case Doomfist and Wrecking Ball are perhaps the best tanks for smurfing, because they can actually interact and therefore exploit very effectively the mistakes of the backline. But if you're actually playing at your skill level, not only do they leave the frontline wide open, the ability to make the most interactive tanks suddenly completely useless is down to pressing a couple of buttons at spawn. As a result, many tanks understand that no matter what they pick, their gameplay is inevitably going to be highly non-interactive. If you can't directly take advantage of your enemy's mistakes yourself, you may as well play a hero that at least reduces the chance that you'll make a mistake, hence the Orisa meta. Orisa doesn't really do anything flashy or particularly remarkable, but effectively none of the other tanks can either, so who cares? Orisa isn't good because she does anything to you, she's good because you can't do anything to her. So the tank's only hope of getting value is indirectly, cycling through Javelin Spin and Fortify, taking the space that they can, while not being able to use any of the space themselves, hoping that their teammates will find a way to utilize the space that they create. At the end of the game, you never feel like you played particularly well, you're just glad that you played well enough so that your team could help you. Now I should mention that how much you relate to what I'm saying may vary depending on what rank you mainly play in. And I'm not trying to talk down to any players of any rank, or to suggest that your experiences of the game are illegitimate. But I do want to clarify why something that may not seem like that big of a deal is being so heavily discussed by certain players. Lower ranked tank players may not find that their role feels any worse than any of the other roles, and may even find that they win games more reliably when playing tank compared to damage and support. Lower ranked non-tank players may even prefer the current state of tank specifically because it's easier to survive. In the lower ranks, tank can feel quite impactful. For the sake of example, let's just say that tank has half of the team's responsibilities. As a result of having half the responsibilities, you also have half of the opportunities to make mistakes. Assuming the enemy tank is going to be making a lot of those mistakes, which is characteristic of lower ranked tank players, you can make quite a huge difference just by playing competently. In addition, the other enemy players are going to be making a lot of mistakes as well, giving you an opportunity to make an impact. But the feeling of agency isn't necessarily a result of good game design, but rather the enemies are using their agency to kill themselves, and you happen to be there to witness it. As you climb the ranks, not only do players make less and less mistakes, but the degree to which those mistakes allow a tank player to be the one to capitalize on them decreases significantly. At higher ranks, players no longer overextend into your effective range as often, and players know how to properly use their cooldowns to negate any attempts at aggression. As such, the impact of the tank role decreases significantly as you go higher in rank, which leads to differently ranked players possibly disagreeing on how they feel about the overall state of the tank role. I received some comments in my previous video stating that tanks already have tons of damage and tons of health. What more could they possibly need? Damage and health are of course only one part of a character's kit, and therefore do not tell the full story of how that character is going to play or how impactful they're going to be. Reaper is not any more impactful than Widowmaker just because of the larger health pool or DPS potential. The answer to what tanks are lacking is largely their breadth of utility, that is, the number of things they can do. The best way to think about impactfulness, in my opinion, is not how many responsibilities you have, but how many ways are there to interact with the enemy team on your terms. A good example to illustrate this point is the Pharah versus Junkrat matchup. Pharah can interact quite easily with Junkrat, and so Pharah has a lot of impact on Junkrat. Junkrat can't interact with Pharah at will, and so Junkrat has very little impact on Pharah. Junkrat can still kill Pharah if Pharah makes a mistake, but that happens on Pharah's terms, not Junkrat's. Tank, as of right now, can feel like you're trying to play Junkrat into a team of 4 flying characters. The only thing you can do is to wait for them to make a mistake. But if they're competent and they know how to avoid or disengage you, your experience is going to be very non-interactive. Of course, you can still get indirect value by enabling your team. That's why tanks are still completely playable, and you can't use their low impactfulness as an excuse for why you can't play well. However, relying on your team is generally not a very engaging experience, and especially conflicts with the average personality of someone who would want to main tank in the first place. And as such, the popularity of tank has an inverse relationship with rank. But hey, at least tank has fast queue times. If you made it this far, I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing and leaving a like and comment to support the channel. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful day.